Hello, I'm Kieran, and today we are reading Greenlight Medical Anatomy of Kindness by Luna Shur and AO3, Chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3, Under Greenlight. Cafe Forest Screen closed for further customers at 9 p.m. sharp. By 9:15, the remaining orders were done and the last of the people were ushered out. It cleared out completely by all staff at 10. Clinic Greenlight Medical, as its patients have come to call it, opened at the same place in the exact same rooms as 1 hour before midnight. The only one there to witness the door of the clinic being unlocked was a certain green-haired teenager who owned the property. Yes, you might think the clinic was opened by his mother as well, her being a doctor out of the two of them, but that assumption would be wrong. The clinic was created 2 years after her death. Izuku had been grieving his mother and his dream to be a hero. He refused to go to the foster system or to be thrown into an orphanage, so that meant he had to find means to support himself. Sure, the cafe was up and running, but it would crumble soon with only half of the ownership responsibilities taken care of. So he had a choice. Either give up the cafe and go into the system, or give up school altogether with his dream to become a hero, because what hero school would take him without an education? Take over the cafe full-time and hope that no one who had the influence to do so would take it from him. From the beginning, he had a pretty good idea of what he would choose. The cafe was one of the dearest gifts his mother had given him, and he would fight tooth and nail before ever willingly giving it up, and the staff within, up to anyone. Still, he did his research, because wouldn't his mama want him to follow his dreams? To be a hero? She did so much for him, it would be senseless to give up now. But the further he got into research about the foster system, the more his mood soured. Quirkless kids were never mentioned, as if they didn't exist, and if they were, well, it didn't look good for him. He was apparently likely to become homeless before adulthood, even if he found the will to live past the age of 15. His decision was made. Izuku sent in a pre-prepared document to his school, saying he would be pulled out of his classes effective immediately. Forging his mother's signature for the first time felt worse than what he assumes it would feel for the average teenager, but he was on a time limit. He had to get this through before the death of his mother was made public knowledge, and the teachers would wonder why the hell a dead woman was sending them papers. He was lucky. Within a day, he had an answering email in his mother's inbox, wishing her and himself a good life. Guess the school really did not want a quirkless kid attending, huh? The moment that answer came, it felt like it cemented in the decision of being a hero. Years of being told that he would never make it and fighting against those claims all washed down into the drain. It was hard to fight the grief of a dream being buried in a graveyard of your own minds. That was until he found something to distract himself with. People often kept the rooms of their dead loved ones exactly as they were, to avoid the grief and finality that came with stepping into the room and looking at a room that's lost its lifeline. Izuku had no such feelings when entering his mother's old home office. To him, the room was filled with hours of enjoying one's passion, calm and happy memories, and of course the feeling that the part of his mother got back. Her job was what she truly enjoyed, and the office was just an extension of that. He didn't know what drew him into the medical textbooks standing in the large shelves in the first place, but he was glad it happened. He missed studying, he missed the lessons and absorbing information, and he missed writing exams, even if they were never graded fairly. So once the books got away into his hand, there was no stopping him. A whole lot of studying, one accidental run-in with a vigilante, and 3 years later, he was an up-and-running clinic for vigilantes. He took out his dream for being a hero out of the corners of his mind again, lived it out in its own way to the fullest. Yes, he was quirkless, and yes, he never set foot in a hero school, but he was saving and helping people who protected others. Yes, they were vigilantes, but wouldn't they be doing a hero's work? So that made him a hero by proxy. And as they often like to say, he was their hero too. Just a little bit before midnight, it began raining. He went outside to stand in the back alley, staring at the green light above the door. Izuku often questioned if what he was doing was wrong. After all, he had no medical license, and the heroes he fixed up had no license for what they were doing either. Sure, whatever he was doing could be called extended first aid, but by not telling them, he was basically being an accomplice to vigilantism. He sighed. The rain didn't bother him. In fact, it felt like washing away some of the heaviness around his soul. This was just his way of being a hero. After the light was switched on, all he had to do was wait. If everything stuck to his usual schedule, the first patients would be coming in around midnight or so. In the early night, low-threat criminals tended to make their appearance instead of actual villains. The real big guns, who were actually a serious threat and were often armed with weapons, usually got out after midnight, so he still had time to get himself ready quickly. He pulled his hair back in a short, low ponytail, making sure that no strands at the front were peeking out. After that, he picked up a small voice changer. Izuku was quite proud of it, as he built it his own when the clinic was just starting to build its reputation. Turning it over in his hands, he switched it on before putting the neck pieces around himself. Next then came the mouth covering piece, which he secured around his face by pulling the straps around his head and clicking the two together.
Testing, testing.
The speakers at the side of his cheeks vibrated weirdly, but he got used to the feeling when the first year of his odd job. The voice came out low-pitched with a slight metallic ring to it, making him sound nearly robotic. Izuku guessed that while it might sound unnerving at first, it actually calmed in a particular sort that the patients sensed the way that they were less likely to be reminded that there is an actual human under the mask that could potentially rat them out to the police. He had already changed out of his work uniform already, so all that was left to do was sit and wait. It was nearly an hour later when the first knock at the door came. Izuku jumped up, pulling his hood and covering his hair, eager to get to work. It might seem cruel if you thought about it too much, because that basically meant he was excited for someone to be hurt. But really, he was just happy that he got to help those who had no one else to turn to. After all, how does one come into a hospital and exclaim how they got a stab wound without providing information about the fight itself? Your identity as a vigilante could easily be found out if you just mentioned a slightly wrong detail. One moment you're sitting in the ER wanting to be treated, the next you've still been treated, but you could also be cuffed to the bed and police officers waiting to throw you into a jail cell. So yes, Izuku's clientele was strange, and most of them didn't talk about what happened. Glad for someone who doesn't ask questions. Izuku went over to the door, and opening it up, he saw a familiar figure. Screw whatever he just said about not being told anything. In front of him stood the biggest chatterbox of them all. Vigilante Ghost. Yes, with that name you might think they would be all mysterious, cold, and quiet. But no, quite the opposite. Hey Doc, don't happen to have time for me, do ya? It was an unnecessary question, of course. She walked past him to the plastic-covered table and sat down, kicking her legs into the air. Izuku watched her carefully. She might seem like her usual cheerful self, but she would have usually skipped over to the table instead of just walking. She quite obviously favored her left leg, and she was hiding a wince with nearly every step. Goddamn vigilantes, always so eager to hide their injuries even when standing across the one they came to fix it. Well, at least she wasn't hiding an entire gunshot wound this time. Izuku went over to the little case he set up earlier, fishing out his miniature ADU scanner. The Adapted Diagnostic Unit wasn't really a recent invention in the medical field, but a backside version was. Instead of a large machine, it was just barely over the size of a thick schoolbook. It was one of his most cherished possessions, and he would be glad to have acquired it, even if it cost a small fortune and was done with the money one of his patients left at the doorstop. He didn't want to know where the money came from, but was glad for it. Touching and prodding at a swollen loom that would only surely say if it wasn't broken or sprained.
Please hold still,
he told the squirming vigilante as he crouched before her and held the scanner over her leg at a precisely 1 foot distance. Above him, the vigilante chatted about the happenings of the night. Something about an attempted assault, running across another vigilante, hiding out in an empty apartment building together for their partner to cause the police on their tail end. And then, of course, Verity nearly nailed the jump from the door next to the building. So, honestly, she's just a little banged up from a rough landing. But then, of course, I completely fell off. Nearly fell on the fence between buildings and got myself stabbed. Just barely missed my hip. Can you believe that? The audacity of that fence! Izuku hid a smile behind his mask. The energy that Ghost and her partner Verity always brought was refreshing. Of course, with that amount of energy and chaos in their step, was a little worried about how young they were. While they had chief voice changers, it still brought along a love for the mayhem that you usually saw in teenagers, not mentioning how they could hide Ghost's small stature. But he was holding out hope for them. Maybe they'd get noticed by some heroes, and instead of being thrown into jail like police often did, they would be put in a reformation program that would allow them to come out as heroes in some years. He really hoped for the best of them. The ADU beeped, signaling the scan was ready for review. He glanced over at it for a solid minute and sighed.
Well, the scan doesn't show anything wrong, but would you mind taking your boot off and lifting your pant leg?
The girl eagerly nodded and began undoing the clasp on her boot. Well, he brought over a pillow that he threw on the ground in front of her so she could kneel down and examine her leg better. It turned out to be just a mild strain on her muscle in the foot that she overstretched during a clumsy landing. To be fair, there were not many people who could pull off an actually good landing while falling from a 3-story house, if her story was to be believed. He wrapped her foot for compression and advised her to use a crutch the next following days until it stopped hurting. It was useless to tell vigilantes to rest and do nothing. They always got up and did stuff anyways, unless they literally had no choice. He was actually kind of relieved that she mentioned she would stay until Verity would come to pick her up and carry home. Izuku helped her go over to one of the two, also covered in plastic sheets, armchairs in the corner, and settle her there with some pillows that he had piled away earlier in the leftover cupcake. On his way, he switched the green light on again. From then, it became a waiting game. His next patient would usually be coming here for an appointment at 2 a.m., so he had plenty of time to kill. Hour was mostly spent scrolling through HeroTube, looking at the latest news and watching some of the hero fights. Once he glanced over at the phone of Ghost and saw that looked suspiciously like an online school homework website, he rubbed his temple. Yes, he couldn't judge when he was literally up at night studying his newest medical textbooks. But seriously, who in their right mind did homework during the night? A knock sounded at the door and Izuku went over to open it. The second patient at the night was the Vigilante, Dora guessed. Just as he ushered them in and closed the door as Ghost's phone vibrated, they picked up a call. Quickly, they stumbled to their feet, bid a short goodbye and the other Vigilante in the room, and hugged Izuku, and then they were on their way out of the door. Izuku only briefly saw a shadow of his figure standing in the alleyway before the door was shut again. For a second, he thought he saw something laying behind the dumpster, but shrugged it off. Probably stray cats again. Dorcas was there for a checkup of an old wound. Well, not really that old, just barely over 2 months old, but with the frequency of how often Dorcas used to come in before they got the hang of their nightly job, it could be considered old. He was sure these checkups were completely unnecessary and that Dorcas could take care of their healing wound themselves, but his best guess was that his patients were relieved that they could finally turn to someone for their health, and that they didn't quite want to let go and trusted him to put their entire care into his hands like some kind of personal doctor. He cleaned the wound, looked it over, and dressed it again. Everything looked fine, as opposed to how it looked like 1 week after stitches, all swollen up, purple in color, and oozing a cloudy liquid. Yeah. He invited Dorcas to stay for tea as they continued their patrol. They usually patrolled a district in the far west of town, so it took them a while to get from their area to the center of the city and to his clinic. Dorcas had been around for 3 years now, which was honestly a good time for a vigilante. Most get caught during their first few weeks of work. Dorcas had been there for his first year while starting out, and quickly figured out his identity due to him being without a voice changer and with his muscles to make him appear older at the time. In turn, they revealed their identity to him too. It just made donations to the cafe. And so they sat in the dark of the cafe, a small lamp illuminating their faces as they drank their green tea, and each of them ate one of the leftover cupcakes. They held a bit of small talk. How's his office job going? Haven't been fired yet? How are the other vigilantes doing? Did any team up recently? Just a boring chat concerning their respective jobs. But it was nice. Izuku would never admit to their face, but Dorcas reminded him a bit of his mother. They were 34 years old, about the same age as his mother when she died, and that her dark green hair also looked oh so similar to his own. Whenever he's honest with himself, he remembers that Dorcas were somewhat of a role model for him, where his mother couldn't be. But they weren't his mother. They had their own life. So after just 10 minutes, Izuku was standing in front of his cafe together with an unmasked Dorcas and saying goodbyes. And then he heard it, a dull thud coming from the alleyway beside them. Dorcas gave him a look as he fumbled to say goodbye and just pulled their mask on before disappearing into the night. Right. He had a potential patient for him waiting in the alleyway. After all is said and done, thank you for listening.